Hi. Welcome to my Ultimate Survival Guide on GCSEs, and I'm going to be talking about how I got the grades that I did and the things that I wish I did. For reference, these are my grades, and that's just my argument for why you should believe what I have to say. Anyway. So starting off with some hardcore STEM, we got biology, chemistry, physics. I did OCR biology and AQA physics and chemistry. And straight off the bat, I'm going to tell you one thing. Use the specification. That is the biggest advice I have for anyone doing sciences very specifically. The specification it tells you everything you need to know. It's whether it's just like a checklist, the way OCR is set out, or whether it's more in depth and functions almost like your notes, which is what I would say for AQA. It saves you so much time because you could be revising things. Sometimes teachers tell you extra things to put things into context or widen your understanding. They might even go into a bit of A-level sometimes, you know. That's what some of my teachers did. And you don't need to know that for GCSEs. You are wasting your time. So use the specification and learn what you need to learn. Please. For AQA specifically, I literally use the specification like they were my notes, because they do function like notes. For OCR, I tended to annotate the specification. I'd either download a copy of it or I would print it out and I would annotate around it. And I think that it just kept it organised, kept everything in one place, and it was GCSEs, the way they are like tick the box. So I was just ticking the boxes with that. Things that were missing or I needed more in-depth stuff on, anything that I needed more explanations in, I would use the CGP book. So I recommend revision guides. The CGP book is just, while sometimes it has a lot of extra information, other times it doesn't go into like full depth, I think that they are worth having for biology, chemistry, physics. I did not use revision guides for any of my other subjects. I only used those 3 books. Trust me when I say I bought books for history, for geography, for French. I didn't use any of them. I literally just used CGP books, the revision guides, for biology, chemistry, physics. That is all. I literally just used the CGP books and the spec and practice questions. You are wasting your time if you are just sitting there rewriting your notes. That's not an effective expenditure of your time. I used the CGP book. I would highlight things, I'd annotate it, I'd take things from the spec. So those two worked so well for me together. As for things I wish I did at GCSE, biology was my worst grade out of all of them. It's not bad at all, but it was my worst one. For me, I just think that OCR was it was one of the most particular mark schemes. You have to be very specific with hit the nail on the head with your answers. So I'd say what I do now, because I actually took biology for A-level, and I think I'm doing better at it now than I was at GCSE because of 2 factors. One being the way I'm revising and consolidating my notes. And I currently use the cheat sheet method to keep everything together. And then the other thing is how I spread my time out. I think a lot of other subjects I took, I spent more time on them, and sometimes I wouldn't spend as much time on biology. I'd spend a lot of my time on chemistry because it was one of my worst sciences. And I think the final step of my revision included very greatly practice questions. Practicing, putting my knowledge to the test, and then looking at mark schemes, taking keywords, making sure that I'm applying that in my answers later on when I would go into the exam. Sometimes if I got sick of just doing practice questions or something like that, I would do blurting, which is another great active recall method. If you haven't heard of blurting, it's basically when you have a topic in the middle of a page, say biology, let's say B1, the first topic, and then you write down as much as you can remember in one colour, and then I add things I missed out in a different colour. So in summary, best revision methods for science, the specification, the CGP revision guides and annotating them, highlighting them, taking things from between the spec and the CGP books, blurting to put the knowledge to the test, and practice questions, looking at mark schemes. Okay, moving swiftly on to the humanities. I took both history and geography. Yes, you heard me right. History and geography. And I achieved grade 9s in both of those. The things that got me through these were a specific trick that I'm going to tell you about. I don't know if I'd call it a trick. Mind maps, in order to condense my notes and knowing my answer structures. So, the first one is, I don't know if you'd call it a trick, but essentially it's just having a whiteboard, or I just used my mirror, and I think it was even more effective this way. So, I'd write on my mirror using a whiteboard pen anything that I was missing out. So, for example, in history, there were some things that I knew by the end of the course really well, and it was really just like stuck in my mind, like the amount of reparations the Germans had to pay after World War One. I know it, okay? Don't need to, I've already seen it so many times. I'd write things on the mirror that were more niche parts of things that I'd learned, and possibly things that I'd seen come up in past paper questions, and I was like, oh my god, I don't know what this is. I can't remember this at all. So I'd write down key events, or for geography, maybe it was like a process, like for example, how dunes form. For the life of me, it was really hard for that to stick in my head. So I'd write that down on my mirror, and because it's on my mirror, every single day I see it against my will, but also it's there. I have to see it. And when I was like making my bed, before bed, I would walk past my mirror and I'd be like, oh, blah, 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 date. Oh my god, I remember it now. So that's probably one of my favourite tricks. Mind maps were my favourite way to consolidate my notes. I made so many mind maps, and that was my favourite way to consolidate my notes. I did it for history and for geography, and I did it topically, so they were organised. So for example, it was like an urban challenges, stapled little like almost booklet, or for history it was the Elizabethan era as a topic. So important that you know the answer structures, because in an exam for humanities, the time is so tight. You've got to go. You see a question and you haven't got a lot of time, if I'm honest. So it's just got to be up there. So with history and geography, I walk into an exam and I know exactly, like, it's a mental plan of what I'm going to write, and that was just so helpful, and it got me through, I'm going to say. So for geography 9 markers, for example, I would just know that I'm going to write 3 paragraphs and a conclusion, and I was always ready to go. And by the end of the course, the 9 markers, which is one of the longest question types in AQA geography, it was honestly one of the easiest parts of the exam. So that was much shorter than the sciences section, but my key points are using a whiteboard or a mirror and having yourself surrounded with your content, because it's so much to take on in bulk that it's just so great to have that around you, because then you're just revising without even knowing that you are, to be honest. Mind maps, keeping your notes condensed, keeping it all together. I kind of wish I did that as I went along and did little and often, and learning my facts and things little and often. So like looking at, for example, a little section of the content every single day rather than doing it more in bulk. Knowing the structures to the exam questions and then practicing that. You can always ask teachers to mark it for you, look at the mark schemes, and also try and grade yourself. Because I found that I was always my harshest critic, but that made me push myself more and try and perfect my answers as much as possible. French. In my school, it was obligatory to take a language, either Spanish or French. I took French, got a grade 9. Let's get into how I did that. French, there are multiple components to the exam. I think that for AQA French it is changing, but there are still components like listening and speaking, writing, etc., etc. For speaking, I think it is one of the most nerve-wracking parts for a lot of people, and I think that was one of my best. We had at our school a speaking book where we would have the required questions and questions that would frequently be asked on speaking exam given to us, and then we would, every single time we finished a theme or a topic within the theme, we would write what we would say, and that was how I knew exactly, that was already a script for me to follow. But if you're like me, you don't want to sit there and memorize all of the answers because that's so many answers to learn off by heart. I tried to build myself up to a confidence where I could just kind of YOLO, like just go off the bat with my answers. I would have specific phrases learned and good to go. So for example, something about a park, pizza, popcorn, opinion phrases, things like that, certain adjectives. I would just have learnt those. So if ever I was in an exam, I can always just throw that in there. To achieve top band, they frequently want complexity. So I had some complex phrases written down, more complex tenses to really show to the examiner that I know what I'm talking about. Practice speaking. Practice speaking to your stuffed animals, I don't know, to your parents, because it doesn't even matter if they don't speak French. It's the point is you're getting it out there in the world. You're practicing, because you cannot do speaking without practicing speaking. It's not going to work. You can't write what is going to be spoken, because also the thing is, French, it's a foreign language and there's a different accent. In terms of notes, I made a sheet like a few weeks before my French exam, and it was just a sheet with all of the tenses, because French has so many tenses, and it had all the tenses, and it was just a condensed way of me knowing the grammar, because the grammar is the foundation of the language, and it helps you so much if you know the grammar really well, so you can just formulate your sentences. It also really helped in listening when you're hearing things really quickly and you need to understand, was it past, was it present, was it future? If you know your tenses really well, you're already doing yourself a solid. For writing, I did a fair bit of practice for that, and I would get my French teacher to mark it, and it just really helped build my confidence, because also, I have to say, for me personally, I find that languages, the timing in the exam is really quite simple to navigate. You have quite a bit of time on your hands in the exam. So making sure also to build good habits, like checking through your answers when you're done, really helps, because sometimes I spot mistakes and I'm like, I can't believe I made this mistake, and it can cost you. Knowing how much to write as well in a French exam. You don't want to be overwriting, because the more you write, the more likely you are to make mistakes. So I would try to stick to the amount of words given to you. So say 90 words or 150 words. Try not to exceed it by a mile, because you are just increasing the probability of mistakes being made. Mathematics. Mathematics is, it is, along with chemistry, probably one of my least favourite subjects. Sue me. Yeah, I've been on a long road with maths since primary school, because I feel like it was taught so badly. I had a really bad foundation for maths. But in the end, I achieved a grade 8 in maths, which I'm quite happy after such a long struggle through life with maths. You're going to hear it 1,000 times, and I'm going to say it 1,000 times. Practice questions. Maths is not based on content as much as, say, history and geography. It is very, very practical. It is the most practical subject there is. You quite simply just need to know what methods there are and just be able to execute those methods in a question by practicing, by making mistakes, learning from them, and not repeating those mistakes. That is why you need to practice as well. I'm not your maths pro. This is genuinely just how I got better at maths. English language and English literature are some of the most struggled with GCSEs in my opinion, and I've seen people either love it or hate it by the end of the course. There was literally no in between by the end. So for English language, there's not much that I could say. I think that the main things that I did to get an 8 in English language were to look at indicative content of mark schemes in old practice questions, and that really helped me build up the vocabulary that I could use and the ideas that are quite repetitively within the text that AQA gave me. So, for example, I knew what language features to look out for a lot, and it's quite repetitive. There's not much that they can bring in. They won't give you texts that don't have absolutely anything to talk about. There will be some sort of metaphor, significant language choice there. As for the writing questions on both the papers, question 5, I had a word bank with phrases or words that for different situations. For example, for a descriptive scenario, I'd have like for a sunny situation, for a kind of moody atmosphere. Like I was ready for any sort of description, and I also knew I had strategies for the narrative and descriptive writing, the non-fictional writing as well. I also had a strategy. I knew what I was going to do when I got into the exam. I just prepared myself for anything, really. I also made sure that I knew once I got into the exam, for example, for the paper where you have 2 different options to write about, I knew like if I get a good descriptive writing question, I will do the descriptive writing question, and I just prepared myself for that. Similar to the humanities, knowing the question styles and what to write in the answers is very important. Time blocking as well within the exam. I found that writing how long I was going to spend on a question within the exam really quickly helped me stay on top of the time, because you don't want to be overspending time on something like 8 markers when you've got a 12 marker or a 20 marker to be writing. I think this is kind of just generic advice that teachers would give me, but I think the word bank really helped me, as in things that I did for myself, and indicative content. Those were the main things that I did. For literature, I think I can shed more light on this because I also take English literature now for A-level, and I did get a 9. I also got full marks on the first paper, so listen up. I did an Inspector Calls, Macbeth and Jekyll and Hyde for my 3 texts, and I did Worlds and Lives for my poetry collection. Starting off with Shakespeare, a writer who has confused and confuzzled generations of people. I currently study Shakespeare, and I discovered this website called LitCharts, and I really recommend this website, and they do have Macbeth on there, for those of you who study Macbeth. And there's a function on there called Shakes Clear, which essentially provides a translation. So, for example, if you're missing out on the plot, you're not understanding what's going on, I really recommend that website. It literally has like a line-by-line comparison of the actual line versus what it means. So I really recommend that website. So for those people who aren't interested in English that much and also might not be paying attention in lessons, I really recommend that website. The main thing, I think I noticed quite a bit of a trend. I used mind maps again and blurting for English literature to be able to remember quotes, to remember what I would link to, themes, ideas, patterns in language, all that jazz. I think that for English literature, an understanding of themes is very important, especially for your AO1, which is the ideas. So I tried to kind of, as I went through the texts, always link to the themes, and I would also tab my texts with those little paper tabs as well, so that I could find quotes really easily when I'm revising. I think something that I found now that I'm studying A-level, with each act, for example in Shakespeare, I do a summary sheet where I have the summary of each scene within the act, and then within each scene I've written down like the key quotes as well. So it just makes referral and revision really much easier, and I do that after I've finished every act. So that's something I wish I did at GCSEs because I think it was more organised. Okay, and piece of advice I would have, because by the time you get to year 11, you might have forgotten. So Inspector Calls was my first text. I didn't remember, it wasn't as fresh in my head anymore. So rereading it, at least just going through, seeing those old annotations that you made and those old highlights that you made, it will just start coming back to you. So make sure that you are familiar with your text before you go into the exam, because you need to know the text. Poetry I struggled with, I think. It's always been, I think I've thought I struggled with it more. It's actually not as bad as I thought it was. Poetry, I tried not to like throw myself out there and into the deep end and learn all the poems off by heart, learning absolutely everything. I tried to condense everything together and group things into themes that they applied to within my anthology. And that way it would be easier to make links as well, because you need to make comparisons with the named poem and one of the other poems in the anthology. I think with English it's all about being able to make links and connections, whether that's within themes, language patterns, linking back to contexts as well. Just having all of your notes in one place, having some sort of consolidation going on, whether that be a mind map for a specific act, a timeline. I think that that would really help with revision. Blurting was one of my favourite methods to learn quotations. I'd literally just like really quickly scribble down, like, let's say I had Macbeth in the middle, and then I'd expand around all the key quotations I could remember about him, because I think that it really made it stick. It made me actively recall everything that he said that was really significant, because obviously he's a very key character. I recommend physics and maths tutor for if you're unsure what the themes are, what the characters are, and you need a quick briefing on their significance. Then I would go to physics and maths tutor, because they have lists of the key characters according to them, and then you can click on them and you can get booklets with the information on them. It'll have contexts in there, key quotations, analysis, comparisons between characters. So that really helped fill in the gaps for me. For example, in Macbeth, Macduff, he's a key character but also not that key in a way. He just doesn't come up as much as, for example, Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. But in order to just reassure myself that I knew the play well enough, I went to physics and maths tutor, printed that booklet out, filled in the gaps in my knowledge. For the essays, the struggle with English I think people find is that this is one of the most structurally structured subject. It's really subjective. There isn't a strict structure like Peel in that's what I used for history and geography. It's not as simple as that. It's too shallow. I think knowing what the AOs are, so AO1, AO2, AO3, that was really important to me. I tried to use buzzwords like this suggests that, this connotes. Connotes is a really good word to use generically. If I was ever stuck in an essay and I was like at a blank point, this connotes and this, it just really helps me to know that I'm expanding, and that was really good for GCSE. If you're stuck on ideas, I recommend once again going to practicing questions, and specifically just planning out your answers. And if you're stuck with, for example, an idea, what to start your paragraphs with and what to talk about in your essay, go to the indicative content, and like you can nick AO1 points from the mark scheme, so you can just understand like what ideas you can talk about. Be prepared for anything in English, whether that be you could get two characters and have to compare them in a way, kind of. You could get a theme, you could get a character alone. Be prepared for anything. Being strategic is good, but don't try and predict the questions and limit yourself. Okay, the final one, the best for last, I guess, because this is one of my favourite GCSEs, is art, which I did get a grade 9 in and achieved one of the highest scores in my year. I need to start by saying I did AQA art, and I did it not through a sketchbook, I did it through using a folder, a huge folder that I carried around with my current artwork that I did. So all of my artwork was very big, on more like A3 sheets rather than an A4 sketchbook or something. The main piece of advice I would give, when I started art, I was quite disorganised with my first unit, which was natural forms. I didn't finish any of the pieces in that first topic. They were all a bit unfinished. Just kind of recommend finding a way to organise yourself and pace yourself. At A-levels, I think I'm more about writing things down, whether that be on my Notion page or in a planner. But when I was at RGCSE, I kind of just had a mental plan of what I was going to do and where I was at. Typically, when you come across an idea for a project or for what you want to produce, you normally go straight with that idea. You normally already know, oh my gosh, I want to paint this as my final piece. But the examiners want to know how you got there, so you might have to backtrack a little bit and think of a wider idea first. Have fun with it, I would frequently have an idea for my final piece, and then have to backtrack, and it's a bit annoying at first, but then I realised like I can have fun with the initial ideas board, you know, go on a little Pinterest dive, print things out, have fun with it, do something that I'm really passionate or interested in. Yes, art can be quite taxing, but I think trying to learn how to have fun with it will really just help, and it will bring a certain ease to your GCSEs. When starting a project or any topic, it's nice to do a bit of a brain dump on ideas that you have, references you're going to make, just a messy mind map. And then you know what, you can stick that on any of your boards, any of your sheets where you talk about how you got to that point. Because the examiners want to know how you got to your final product. What was the thought process behind it? Why you did certain things? Why you changed certain bits throughout the project? They want to know. They want to know the whole story. When it comes down to art GCSE, there is a really important part, which is photography. So when I started art GCSE, I was like, oh, art. And then I remembered, oh my God, I have to also
take pictures for everything.
I was my own model. With photography, my greatest advice is just have range, okay? Think like an Instagram model would, okay? Take as many poses as you can, you know? I don't know if that's how they think, but that's what I'm assuming. Art GCSE is all about showing range of ideas, variety. So in conclusion for art, trying to stay on top of your work so it doesn't pile on. Staying organised, because you don't want to be completing like 5 pieces at the end of your course when your deadline is in like 2 weeks. Having fun with it, relax. It's an excuse to go on Pinterest, I'm telling you right now. It's a grandest excuse to go on Pinterest, to take some silly little pictures, do random sketches, and then stick it all down in a fancy collage. Have fun with it. Brain dumps, mind maps. I can't shut up about the mind maps today. Showing how you got from an initial idea to a final project. And spare no detail with it. The examiners want to see that. They want to see the range you have and your creativity getting the best of you. So that's a wrap on all of my GCSEs, all 10, and how I got the grades that I did. And the things I wish I did a bit differently in some of them. And I really hope that was helpful. Yeah. If you liked this video, leave a comment on anything else I should do, maybe. Or any shorts or reels that you want to see about studying or advice. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And, yep, that's a wrap.